Raz tells me it's better if we move over this way so Rob can use the PowerPoint a little better. A word or two about Rob. Rob's been a long time admissions guy, been at a bunch of different places. He's been at Bucknell for a number of years now, what, 4?
4.5.
4.5. Done a great job. When you have people who care about kids as much as Rob does, and cares about the process at the other end, it helps us a lot. We have a really strong relationship with Bucknell because they want it that way, we want it that way. You know, we have a really good dialogue. They visit us all the time. It's a wonderful place to go to school, and we're really, really lucky to have Rob's vision, his experience. Last night, he and his friend Greg McDonald from Lafayette, his counterpart, came up and spent an hour with our juniors, and just unscripted Q&A, and it was a really nice time for the kids, and a great opportunity for them to learn more about the process, and to hear it right from the horse's mouth, because sometimes, you know, they hear a lot of different things, but when somebody as experienced and well-respected as Rob Springall starts to tell them something, they tend to listen. There were times when there wasn't a sound in that room and these kids were focused on what these guys had to say. So that was a great opportunity for them. But anyway, listen, I would let Rob take it over, and you know, at the end, we'll have plenty of chances to ask questions, I'm sure. So feel free, and let's make this as relaxed and comfortable as we possibly can. Rob?
Okay. Thanks, sir.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. Good. I understand I'm being live streamed. I don't know what that means. I was a computer science major in college, but that was back in the 1980s. So we didn't have any of this technology. We didn't even have PowerPoints. Those of you who are about my age or a little older remember presentations like this. If they included visual aids, they included slides on little pieces of plastic we had on overhead projectors. So this is all new and interesting to me still. As Lou said, my name is Rob Springall. It's my privilege to be the Dean of Admissions at Bucknell University. And I always call it a privilege because it's an amazing opportunity to get to work with great faculty, really cool students, and an admissions team in my office who really, as Lou said, they're the ones who get the work done, and they are totally committed to both the success of the university, but we know the success of the university is entirely derived based on the success and the outcomes of our students. That we can assemble all the great resources in the world, but if we're not delivering it in a way that allows students to benefit from it and then go on and do great things, there's not a lot of point. And we realize when families make the commitment to send their child to Bucknell, just as you all have to send your child to Blair, it's because you think there's such an acceleration of resources here. There's such an acceleration for your child and to leverage the opportunities. My colleague Greg McDonald, who also happens to be my best friend, said it to some of the juniors last night, said, let's look at the ratio between opportunities and your achievements. And while you are, as students, they are exceptionally lucky to be here, we also realize that there is a burden that we hope and we know they raise to the challenge of taking advantage of this place. So, and we hope that this process for them allows them to take advantage of whatever great college or university is at the end of their Blair career. So, as Chris said, we always expect from, especially from this place, the outcomes to be successful ones. We also have every reason to believe every student who graduates from Blair will get those great outcomes. A couple of my favorite students at Bucknell right now are Blair grads. It seems I have about one every year. That I'm not supposed to make favorites about amongst 925 kids, but I do. And my greatest moment of disappointment, and then I'll get along with my remarks. My greatest moment of disappointment this year so far has been when I tried, like the Dickens, to convince a Blair grad who's now in our first year class, Maddie Kling, to join our tour guide program. I recruited her like a football coach tries to recruit kids. I didn't do a home visit, but I did take her out to lunch in the fancy faculty dining room with her and her roommate. I said, Maddie, I think you'd add a lot to the tour guide program. You're a difference maker. It's a skill position. And she turned me down. Because she's already involved in so many great things and has already represented Blair and certainly represents Bucknell very well. So why don't we go ahead in the formal remarks. So, fantastic. First, a word from our sponsor, Bucknell University. Let me tell you a little bit about the place if you're not familiar with it. Just a couple of things. Bucknell University is a university of liberal arts and sciences. We are actually classified as the largest liberal arts college in the country at about 3,500 undergraduate students. Though we also are known very much so for our School of Management, which recently received accreditation from AACSB, and one of the most well-known colleges of engineering that is not located at a university that grants PhDs. In other words, we're an entirely undergraduate-centric institution, but we still think we offer some pretty strong programs in a unique combination of being that warm, intimate, small liberal arts institution, but taking advantage of a size that's unusual for a place like ours. We'll see if the technology, again, computer science major, that doesn't mean I know how to use the technology. We are located in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, which if you get on Interstate 80 and point your car west, we're about 2.25 hours from Blairstown, right off exit 215A. So we're nice short drive. And actually one of the things that I hear from Blair students and students other Maple Leaf schools is while they want a different college experience than their high school experience, they say some of the same characteristics of human-scaled, personal education, great small town environment, very vibrant campus community is the same reason they choose to be at a Bucknell. So that's the end of the advertisement. I will be around later. My father also often says that if there's a big elephant in the room, please make sure to introduce him. I need to get something on the table right away and acknowledge that if you're feeling stressed about this process already a little bit, we understand. What I'd like to introduce to you is the problem that your children are coming into a college process that is ever more influenced every year by two pieces of the environment. I'm not going to call them facts because they're not always true and they're not always based on reason and logic. One is the demographics are changing around us all the time. The competition for colleges and universities is changing all the time. 10 years ago at Bucknell University, we were admitting about 55% of our applicants. This past class, we admitted 29%. Places that are exceptionally selective, a Stanford, a Harvard, a Penn, a Brown. They used to think they were very selective and they were admitting between 20 and 30% of their applicants. Stanford this year was the most selective in the university in the country. Does anybody want to take a guess? If you know the answer, hold it for a second.
6%.
6%, that's actually too high. 5.5. So, We'll give you credit for the 6, but yeah, there's some universities out there that were already exceptionally selective when your kids were born. They're now even more hyper-selective, to the point where as much as Lou and Joe and Jason never want to be in the position to make you any promises, if anything, they will be assertive to you and say, don't expect anything at some of these places, because the number of applications changing what relatively is the same number of seats continues to go up. Places get more selective. And that's the private institutions that have always been that way, the Ivy League institutions, the NESCAC schools, the small liberal arts colleges in New England, but even the public institutions. In our home state of Pennsylvania, Penn State's gotten more selective. Rutgers has gotten more selective. UVA has gotten hyper-selective. UNC has gotten very selective as a public institution. So I need to acknowledge that there is a lot of angst about the process because people are being focused by themselves, but also by the media, on how tough it is to get into college. The New York Times won't sell you any papers by saying, it's a lot easier to get into college than you think. So that's not what they do. So a couple of years ago, this was one of the articles of many, 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 many that you will see as you become more aware that college admissions is in the media nearly every day, that you'll see an article like this that just reinforces that if you live in the northeastern United States and you're looking at the same 50 colleges and universities most every great student is, it's getting harder. It's getting harder because there are more students. In this area, there are more students around the country who are trying to apply to these colleges. And in the case of this article, we as college admissions officers are seeking to go ever farther to fill our classes. So there is some angst. I want to introduce the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is the hardest places to get into are still hard to get into. That's the bad news. The good news I want to deliver to you is if you ask the same students who are anxiety-ridden about this process now, if you ask them 5, 10, 15 years after graduation about whether or not they really liked the school they went to, the vast majority say absolutely. They say absolutely. And if their dream school, and I told the juniors this last night, I'm a Gamecock. I'm a graduate of the University of South Carolina. And I told them, because I always have to put in a plug for my alma mater as well as my employer. I said, if your dream school is the University of North Carolina, you know, a few hours south in Columbia, South Carolina, there's another state flagship school that plays big-time sports, that has a cool campus community, lots of different majors all under one roof. It even has Carolina in the name. Isn't that great? I bet you, if your dream is X, and you're at USC, by the USC, South Carolina, not the other one. Don't get those confused, oh gosh. 10 years after you graduate, you'll be just as happy. I guarantee it. And if you go to the University of South Carolina, you'll also be much more pleased with the football results. So it is getting tougher. I did want to introduce the elephant in the room. It is getting a little harder every year. But one thing, and Chris alluded to this, the college counseling team here will do its darndest with your kids and you to maintain the realism and the humanity of the process. One of my other favorite things about Blair, other than the amazing students that we get the privilege to work with every year, is that this place has a humanity about its college process that you don't find everywhere. And by introducing that humanity, there's also a lot more happiness at the end of the process than I see at some other places. Okay, that's supposed to be you, not yo, you. Another elephant in the room, if you'll let me introduce him, is another fact about the process, like a fact in air quotes, that colleges like Bucknell, where we're admitting about 30% of our students, colleges more selective than us, and I've been at both places that have admitted 80% of their students. My undergraduate is from Rochester Institute of Technology, where I started in admissions, which I think was the first time I came to Blair. I was the New Jersey rep for a couple of years at RIT. Our admission rate was 85%. We didn't use necessarily what I'm going to talk about, holistic review. We called it pulse check. You had one? Okay, you're starting off on the right foot. And then what we did at a place like that is not very selective, the screening primarily is an academic screening. Can you be academically successful in this environment? Yes or no? If yes, you pass through the rest of the process, most likely unfettered to an offer of admission. As you get to places that, and that's with admission rates in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, as you get closer to 50-50 on the admission rate and lower than 50%, towards the 40s and the 30s, colleges are faced with the pleasant dilemma of being able to select from its pool of applicants students, many of whom can do the work, arguably. Most colleges and universities that are hyper-selective are not just going to look at the academic preparation, though that will be the first question. Because sometimes, every once in a while, somebody slips an application to a school without doing their homework and saying whether or not they can really be academically successful and not overwhelmed there. But at a place, at Bucknell and the other places I've worked that are very selective, I was director of admissions in the agriculture school at Cornell University for several years. At a time where our admission rate went from 30% to the high teens. And the conversation was not about whether or not that student could be academically successful. That probably only screened out on an effective day, maybe 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 students. Really, it didn't become entirely an academic matter. It became, what else does that student present? And everything up here in what colleges and universities often refer to as holistic review or holistic admissions, everything you see up here is in play. Demonstrated interest, essays, test scores, grades, yep, grades, obviously, curiosity, commitment to service, relationship between the student's personal or academic interest and the opportunities at that college or university. We're, for example, at Bucknell, we're a college, as I mentioned, primarily liberal arts and sciences, management and engineering. Somebody who wants to be an architect who comes up to me at a college fair is told, have you looked at, and I usually give them a list of at least 6 or 7 other places, especially if I know they're at the college fair, I say, and don't come to Bucknell. Not because I don't want to have an application in the pool, not because I don't want an opportunity to enroll that student, but because I know academically we are really going to underserve their needs, no matter how strong and compelling they are. If that's what they want to do, we're not the place to get started doing that. So holistic admission, it includes all these factors. As you and your sons and daughters go through the process, one of the things to navigate the process with the help, again, of the college counseling team here is to better understand at each institution what is going to be the priority. Is there something that your student has that is going to be a particularly click with that college? How many of you have heard of the concept of the well-rounded student? How many of you think you've raised a well-rounded student? Okay. I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that absolutely we want children as they're developing to get exposure to many different ideas, many different opportunities, many different activities, physical opportunities, intellectual opportunities. But colleges are not actually looking for well-rounded students. We're looking for a well-rounded class. And I told this to the juniors last night, there were about 85 of them there. And I said, we're not looking for 85 photocopies. And I'm looking up there and I'm seeing different hairstyles and haircuts, and I'm seeing different clothing and jackets, and the boys are like, hey man. And of course, I had two wonderful young women literally sitting here, and I'm here. They were spot on. I said, but that's fine, that's the mix we want. We don't want 85 photocopies. We don't want, in our case, 925 photocopies. So one of the challenges of finding the fit is a little introspection on the behalf of your child. And again, this is something I realize the boys struggle with. 16-year-old boys and introspection don't go together. And that's okay. I know you will help them get there. But it's finding what they are all about, what they're like, and then finding some colleges that match that beyond the academics. The academics, as a colleague of mine at Cornell says all the time when she does sessions similar to this, she said, smart is a good place to start, but that doesn't make the decision. So as I was told many times as a nerdy high school kid growing up in Westport, Connecticut, I would ask somebody out. I thought we might be simpatico. And I would usually hear something like, Rob, it's not you, it's me. And what she often meant was, it's me not being interested in you. To the level at which there's anything that could happen between us. And sometimes, and this is something that I want everybody in the room to feel comfortable with, that at the end of this process, sometimes the outcome is a successful one for your student, is a successful one in terms of following the steps to a reasonable outcome. But sometimes it is based on what that university or college wants, more so than the credentials and the preparation of your child. And especially at a place that's more selective, especially at a place that is very broad and holistic in its review process. Sometimes it's not about them, it's about us. And sometimes us means many different things. Again, academics play a significant role in the review that we do. But at Bucknell, for example, we have about 925 spaces in the class every year. We have to make offers to about 2,300 students to get the 925 enrolling. But actually, if we sat down in my office and in March, we're talking with me and my admissions committee about filling the class, it's not about filling the class so much as it is filling all the subpopulations that make up our well-rounded class. And this is several of the characteristics that we have in mind. For example, at Bucknell we have, as I mentioned, liberal arts, we have laboratory sciences, we have engineering and management. An engineering applicant competes against other engineering applicants. So as wonderful as that person's credentials might be versus the applicants we have for the humanities, they're not competing with students who want to study humanities at Bucknell. They're competing against are engineering applicants. And if some years we have a disproportionate number of engineering applicants to the number of seats we have in engineering, we may very well have two very similar students from Blair, for example. One applies to be an English major at Bucknell, the other applies to be a mechanical engineer. And we might argue and say, yes, the student who wants to be mechanical engineering at Bucknell is the better prepared of the two, has the better record of the two, might even have the better scores than of the two. But we might have to say, we need the English major. We want to make sure that next generation of great writers and great critics is available in our graduating class as well. So somebody might call Lou and say, Lou, what happened with our relationship with Bucknell? So-and-so didn't get into mechanical engineering, and he was much better than so-and-so. And the answer might be, well, what did Bucknell need that year? And what's the competition for those particular spaces? But there's also other things in play. We're a Division I athletic program. We have 27 varsity sports. About 20% of our incoming students are recruited by our coaches. And just as much as the coaches don't come over to me and say, well, I think in the rest of the class, you need to take people with higher SAT scores. I don't go to Joe Susan, our football coach, and I don't say, Joe, you need to run the 3-4 formation next year, because this defense you got now is not getting the job done. No, he's never going to come over to me and say that. But he is going to present some candidates and say, amongst these candidates, which ones are most likely to be offered admission? And then I'm going to focus my attention on that. But Rob, to fill a freshman football roster of 25 students, I'm not going to present to you 200 candidates and leave it to the admissions office to pick the ones that are going to be the most appropriate for my football team. I might start with 200, but by the time we get to applications for 25 seats, he's going to present me 25 applications. We've already discussed who is a good fit and who is going to be academically successful. He's already identified who's going to contribute to the team. But yes, he's got recruits who are competing in a slightly different paradigm than the other students. And that is just a fact of Division I athletic recruiting, in our case in the Patriot League. And you'd find the same in the Ivy League, in the Big Ten, in the SEC, in the MAC, the Mid-American Conference. Athletic recruiting, and I know that the team here is very, very, very familiar. If any of your children are interested in playing sports in college and potentially are being recruited, they do an excellent job here of talking people through that. Let me talk about one other thing on this slide, which is mission and history. Another great indicator of fit can be if your son or daughter has a very, very particular academic interest or very, very particular characteristic. Sometimes it can be good to think about, is there something special? Sometimes we treat universities as if mostly they're the same place, but with a different zip code and a slightly different look on campus. I think often when I think of something like this of my colleague John Beckenstedt, who's at DePaul University in Chicago. And DePaul and Bucknell could not be any more different than each other than we both played Division I varsity basketball. DePaul's primary reason for being is to provide access to students from low socioeconomic backgrounds to access higher education. We have the same mission and vision, but DePaul is one of those places where literally the first and only question of the president's mouth to my counterpart at DePaul is, what are we doing about that group? More so than any other university I know of in the country. So sometimes it is about the mission of that university. Historically, what is that university about? In some cases, you have very, very unique institutions around the country, like Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute, Indiana. By gosh, if you're not a geek, don't look at Rose-Hulman. But if you are, it can be nirvana. As much as nirvana can exist on the flat plains of southwestern Indiana. And there can be just an enormous, and as was alluded to earlier, it may be that place that is so, so perfect for your child, but today is something completely unknown to you. And if you can be open to that, the probability of happiness for you, your child, and as a family goes up immensely. Does anybody remember Susie Lee Weiss from about a year ago? Do you remember why she was in the news, ma'am?
I do.
Okay.
Because she, I believe, wrote those letters in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal when she said that, I'm trying to remember her exact words. Oh, that she's about as diverse as a Fulton cracker.
So, and if I can, for the microphone and for those of anybody looking in, yep. So, Susie, as you accurately pointed out, about a year ago wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal entitled "To All the Colleges That Rejected Me," and talked about, and it was perceived differently by different people. Some people thought it was very humorous. Other people thought it was snarky to the point of being unflatteringly sarcastic. That Susie, who graduated as a senior last year from the best, by many measures, the best public high school in Pittsburgh, Taylor Alderdice, wrote a pretty scathing op-ed about all the colleges that rejected me, and I realized that what you're looking to do is fill every population on the face of the earth except me, the saltine cracker student. And she admitted in the piece that while she wasn't the most active student, she thought she would bring a lot to the campuses that denied her admission. In the article, she didn't mention if she had a particular institution in mind, but later in an interview she mentioned the name Vanderbilt. So it did come to light that it was Vanderbilt, and in another article it was mentioned what her academic characteristics were. The irony that we as professional admissions officers dwelled on, probably a little too much, but it was our gut reaction at the time, said, Susie, you weren't going to Vanderbilt, ever. You're academically, you look like, at best, the bottom quarter of the Vanderbilt class. You've admitted you're not engaged at any high level in activities. You're in Pennsylvania, which is one of the top 5 states for sending students to Vanderbilt. So why is it that you thought you were going there? And it turns out, this is the screenshot from the interview I think she did with Savannah Guthrie on the Today Show. And at the end, she was playing very coy and said, well, Savannah said, so where are you going to college? And she's like, well, I really don't think it's appropriate to say anything. And then she said, go blue. And if you didn't miss it, like, go blue. She's going to the University of Michigan. And actually she is. She's taking a gap year, she's going to Michigan. So the outcome for her is very good, but at least the visceral reaction initially was, oh my gosh, I got rejected by all these great schools. And my counterpart at the University of Michigan, Ted Spencer, who Lou knows very well as well, came out later and said, oh yeah, we like Susie. She's a great writer, she was a lot of fun, we think she's going to be a great addition to the class, and Vanderbilt's lost. And the more and more I reflect on Susie, other than that she picked on a lot of people who didn't look like her, and said, well, if it wasn't for you, and 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 you, I would have gone to Vanderbilt. I said, well, no, you're going to a pretty good school. And on their best years, they're going to beat Vanderbilt in football, and basketball, and wrestling, and gymnastics, and the debate team, and everything that doesn't have anything to do with country music. They're probably going to head-to-head. You're fine, you're going to a great school, so don't worry about it. And what we tend to find is, for the students who don't have the advantage of perspective, they get wrapped up in their dream school. They get wrapped up in their number one choice. And to use the analogy I used last night, I said, if your dream school is North Carolina, well, guess what? There's a lot of other places that look a lot like North Carolina. Unless there's any Tar Heels here. Oh, I should have seen that scarf. Sorry. When they play state, I'm all about the Tar Heels. But to have those other things in mind, to don't let your child become Susie, who, though on the other hand, maybe she wants to be a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Maybe this is exactly the plan that she had initially. One of the things that gets lost with the hype I mentioned before, is places get more selective, is the fact that your kids ultimately are in control of the process. Absolutely. What Chris said before, absolutely the case. That sometimes we forget to empower the students going through this process, that actually there are not one question, and where am I going to get in? But there are 5 questions that consciously or unconsciously, as a family and your kids as potential college enrolled students, are thinking about and answering, but sometimes at the expense of subconsciously thinking about some questions and only consciously focusing on a couple of things that are less likely to be in one person's control. These, particularly for me, these are the 5 questions that I often frame the whole process around. And I think, for example, the first one, so if we start at the 12 o'clock position and say, why do I go to college? Do I go to college? Now, I went to an independent school in Westport, Connecticut, and every single member of my senior class cohort went to a 4-year college. I cannot honestly remember a single moment from my birth where my parents and I ever had a discussion that sounded like one of these 2 things. 1, are you going to college? And 2, why? We never talked about that. Never talked about that. I was lucky enough to be in an environment where that set of questions was implicitly answered from my birth. You're going to college. Why? Because your father went to college. Your grandfather went to college. Your great-grandfather went to college. Great-great-grandfather went to college. I am the prodigy. I am the descendant of architects, mathematicians, and dentists. I'm a college admissions officer. Sorry, Dad. My father was also the one, this is a joke that often does not get a laugh, and I understand, I'm okay with it. I am a legacy at MIT. We never talked about it because my father knew that it was just going to be an embarrassment for everybody. He saw my grades. I'm also legacy at Mount Holyoke, and they never returned my calls once. My grandmother's a Holyoke grad. And last I checked, there's still a women's college. But I probably had a better chance, actually, of getting into Mount Holyoke than I did to get into MIT. Probably still that case. But anyway. So, and I present the questions, by the way, as a pie. Why go? Where do I look? Where do I apply? Where do I get in? And where do I go? I present them as a pie of 5 equal slices because I think each question here has equal weight and equal responsibility and equal time in the process. Obviously, the first slice, why go, is something, you know, if you haven't had that conversation now or you think you still need to, have it now and don't wait on it. But often, and again, this is something we shared with the juniors last night. One of the great juniors last night asked the question, what would you say I should be doing now? Because a lot of the questions last night were about getting in. And in a minute, I'll show you why I wasn't surprised by that. I said, this is the time to do some research that you won't have time to do later. A year from now, you're going to be busy sweating out the details of your last college application. You're not going to have the time, interest, or patience to look at the 14th college of the day. But now you can, because they're all fresh, they're all new, they're all exciting. So this is the time to be thinking about where to look, why to go, and where to look. Though, like I said last night, the questions were mostly about how to get in. In preparation for today's event, to be honest, the 5-slice pie I just showed you, I keep on my computer, and every time I have an opportunity to do something like this and meet some great folks at a great school, I always pull the pie out, put it somewhere in the PowerPoint. But I was like, let me go back and check. So I went into Amazon a few days ago, and in the search box, I said books, and I said college admission. And what I did is I looked at the 100 top hits. Said, give me books, college admissions, and then descending order by best selling. And I went through every single one of the top 100, and I said, which of those 5 questions does this book most try to answer? 80 out of the 100 talk about how do you get in, tricks on getting in, tips on getting in, insider perspective. Books by, well, some people that Lou and I know of who worked in an admissions office for 2 to 4 years usually. Name's Michelle. Hi out there if she's watching. I have the insider guide, I have the scoop, I have the trick. And this is exactly what we did at Dartmouth in 1990. That's great, except it's not 1990. And most high school students don't apply to Dartmouth. Sorry to share that with you. Most high school students don't apply to Dartmouth. Almost all the books, almost all the resources talked about the one question that your son or daughter ultimately doesn't have the final say in. They do have the final say in the other 5. But the pressure you'll feel, the anxiety that will come into your being is coming from this. And on behalf of my entire industry, my apologies. We try to talk about the other questions equally, I think. But a lot of what you'll hear around the kitchen tables, either for the students who are day students here, probably nearly every night, or for the boarders, whenever they come home on break, a lot of the question will be about, I'm worried about getting in. You can turn that around and say, if you want something to worry about, why don't you worry about whether or not you're going to be happy wherever you get in by doing your homework? apologize. I did have to make a slightly snarky comment that 2 questions, literally out of these 100 books, 2 questions just weren't answered at all. Not at all. So. As I mentioned before, we're looking to shape well-rounded classes of many different types of students. The best weapon you have to defend yourselves, your family's honor, and your kids in this process, the best weapon you have is information and research. Knowing as much as you can about the places that are out there as great options. Aside from the first 50 on a list, aside from the most selective, aside from the places that you've heard the most about. Students often know too much about their dream schools and not enough about the 6 to 8 other great options that will be available to them after they get their admission letters. This is the time to arm yourself with research. This is the time also to be thinking about what is a student doing to really have the most successful year they can and peak at the right time, which is through the end of junior year. So I know we've got to just, I want to say a couple more things, and I think we're still on time to have some students talk about their experiences here in a few minutes, and then, as Lou mentioned, I'll come back up. Love to hear some questions. And also, if your honest feedback is, my brain is full, can I leave now? We understand. We understand. You've still got a long, long time to go through this process with your kids. And I've never, ever, ever seen a bad outcome out of Blair. Never. A few final words and pieces of advice. As I mentioned, even the places that are most selective and most holistic have a core academic expectation which is articulated in that school's class profile. As you look at your son or daughter's academic record, more importantly is they look at their record and you give them the assignment of, you work with your college counselor and try to figure out what the academic matches are going to be. Encourage them to concentrate on their research on the places that are going to be good academic fits, where they are going to be challenged, but not overwhelmed, and not disappointed by the quality of the peers around them. So look for the academic fits. Then within that group, look at places until some places really start to feel good. And here's why I use the word feel. Often in the process, we understand why people want definitive answers based on data. There are some distinctions between every college or university in the country. But please don't be surprised if sometimes that distinction is articulated by your son or daughter as, it just doesn't feel like the right place for me. Or, I really feel I could be happy here. What we know through the research on the subconscious mental processes about college search, and yes, there are people who've actually studied the subconscious mental processes of the college search, is if you get enough good information in your brain, people actually make reasonably good decisions based on what we would probably call colloquially the gut, a hunch. The danger is that sometimes people fall in love with the first place they've seen, or have a grand vision after 3 colleges. I don't know what the exact number is. 3 colleges is not enough. 300 colleges is too many to look at and really honestly say you digested them. But there is a good number in between. And for somebody whose only college resource in high school was the Barron's Guide. Who remembers the Barron's Guide? Who still has their Barron's Guide? The phone book, as we called it around my kitchen table. We are blessed because of the technology I've mentioned. We are blessed that we can do in-depth, detailed research about every college in the country sitting at our own kitchen table. If we want to know if it's really important to us, the credentials of the Latin department at the University of Colorado, in 30 seconds we can have that information. So there's an embarrassment of riches. And eventually you start to, the logic starts to fade and the gut, the subconscious mental impressions really start to take over. It's kind of cool to see, but at first it's a little scary. Because this is, I won't sugarcoat and say this is not the most important decision. It's the most life-altering decision. And I don't mean that to say if you go to one school, your life's going to be great, and the other school, if you go to the other school, your life's going to be a horrid disappointment. But if you think about it, and did anybody meet their life partner in college? I did. If I hadn't gone to RIT, I would have never met Karen Eldridge at a party in the Perkins Apartments. Because the hockey game was canceled that night. Because in Rochester, New York, there was too much snow, and if you've ever been to Rochester, New York, you know how much snow that is. All these things had to work, but most importantly, she and I both had to be at RIT. And it made all the difference in the world. I would not be who I am without having met Karen. Therefore, I wouldn't be who I am without having gone to RIT. Now, if I'd gone to Rensselaer, maybe my wife's name would be Carol. Or Cara. Who knows? Look beyond the ordinary. A couple of other thoughts. I use my own experience when I talk about this, both undergraduate and graduate, that at this point in my junior year, I didn't know that a school called the Rochester Institute of Technology. And the first time I heard it, I'm like, I have to get a map of New York and find Rochester. But that happens. Your son or daughter, your child may go to a place that you don't know of right now. And if you're okay with that, you're ahead of the game. Because there's about 3,500 options in the United States alone, not even including the occasional student who goes to Canada or overseas to college from Blair. So there's lots of options, places you never heard of. I went to graduate school, as I mentioned, at the University of South Carolina. Go Gamecocks. The first time I looked at USC for graduate school, I couldn't tell you what town it was in. And I had a pretty good idea it was in South Carolina. And I figured there was a USC because I'd heard of the Gamecocks, and I figured every state has at least one university. And for anybody who's a fan of Clemson University, we do joke that there's only one state university in South Carolina. There's a junior college in Clemson. Any Tigers in the room?
Both of the Clemson guys.
Hmm?
Both of the Clemson guys.
Okay. And one other thing, I've already talked about why I encourage people to use your head but trust your gut. The final concept I'll leave you with, and then we'll turn it over to our panel and then to your questions. The concept of the triple likely. And I stole this, I make no bones about it, I stole it from a colleague of Lou's at Germantown Academy outside of Philadelphia by the name of Karen Mason. She introduced me to something that she's had to have realistic conversations about with her families, especially in the last few years. A triple likely, what does that mean? People have heard of the term likely school. You're likely to be admitted to that school, likely. We try not to call them safeties anymore because ultimately every school on a student's final list should not be a safety, should not be a backup. It should ideally be a good choice and not something that somebody is simply being humbled I'm going to my safety school. No, you're going to a school you're likely to be admitted to. Isn't that great? Likely. That's likely part one, is you're likely to be admitted. Likely part two relates to what I just talked about. You're very likely to be happy. Your likely school still has to be a place where the student might say, I'm going to be happy here for 4 years and I'm going to love it. And I am not going to remember that other place at my graduation. I am not going to think about it. And then the third, and this is the reality Karen has told me she's finding more and more, is that you have to have, if there are financial constraints in your family, if there are concerns about financial aid, you have to be realistic to have at least one school that meets the first two criteria and the likelihood that for your family it will not be a horrific financial burden. You're likely going to be able to send your son or daughter there without making them feel guilty for 4 years that they're there. So, likely to get in, likely to be able to afford it. But most important, the most important part of that likely is that they're likely to be very, very happy after going through the entire experience, which hopefully for all of your kids, for all of the students that are represented amongst the population here today, that is what I hope for the most, that your kids find their happiness. And assurance from you that the outcome of the process, with some homework, with some thought, some patience, some introspection, will always result in a happy outcome. So, thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to talking with you again.
They're fine. They're going to be fine. These kids all are fine. It's not, it's not that big a deal. We'll work through it. And so what I want to do is let them introduce themselves, and they'll just give you a little bit of their story, and then we'll just open it up for questions because they have a lot of interesting perspective. Dave.
Hey guys, I'm Daniel Geller. I'm from Chester, New Jersey. I applied ED to Cornell, and I got deferred, but it's all right.
Hi, my name is Demetrius Daltarus. I'm from Yardley, Pennsylvania. I've gone through the recruiting process. I'm a football player. I plan to play football for Cornell University in fall.
Hi, I'm Lauren Michener from Rumson, New Jersey. I had originally planned on playing squash in college, and when I get to that, applied to mostly schools in the South and the West for all early action, and went to University of Denver.
Hi, I'm Casey Sidbright. I'm from Kingston, Jamaica. I applied to the University of Pennsylvania early decision, and I got it, and so I'm here. Hi, I'm Tasha Tatham. I'm originally from Sydney in Australia. I applied early decision to Brown University, and I got to the again. Sorry. Hi, I'm Esther. I'm from Seoul, Korea, and I got denied from Japan and referred from Chicago.
Okay, so any questions? I just picked them, no purpose, just got the ones who agree to be here, so no rhyme or reason necessarily at all. Anyone want to start? Yes.
How do you handle that? In other words, did you perhaps have 3 top choices and now you know the decision by one college and you have 2 more to look forward to? Or how do you balance this out in terms of making sense of this whole process for you?
Go ahead. You guys just jump in.
I think obviously when you get to third, it's tough on you, but I think all the college counselors, they really help you get a really comprehensive list of schools. So I think we all applied early decision to somewhere that was a little out of reach, if not in reach. And so getting to third, it's only a good thing. It's only a positive thing to know that a college, kind of likes you and is interested in you, and you have the qualifications, and it's just not your time right now. So I think with the list that I had to go forward with to apply regular decision,
really actioned all my schools. I didn't have a early decision choice. So I applied for early action, and I got deferred from 2, and I was accepted to 2. And I could have had the option to wait until March or whenever the decisions come out for regular. But I think the college counselors handled it very well. Once I had emailed them what the schools had told me, they were already sending in more of my information, the transcripts and the test scores for that next process. And it just came down to one school that I ended up realizing I liked the most that I had gotten into, so I decided not to wait to find out for the next decision.
For me personally, I had 2 older brothers who also got deferred from their top choices a couple years back. So in my family, we kind of expected, like, just be ready whatever happens. But so we weren't too surprised. I mean, when you get the additional letter, you're like, oh man, for a couple minutes, like, I worked real hard and it didn't work out. But then you realize that it's not the worst thing, because getting deferred just means that you're gonna have to wait a little while. And that's the other thing. The college process teaches you a lot about patience, because anticipation is probably the hardest part about it, because you just want to know, and then you just gotta wait. But it works out, and the college counselors always tell you, like, you're gonna find a school that you're gonna love regardless of what happens. So you just can't have your heart, like, made or broken, whether or not you get into one school, because there's so many out there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
First, let me just tell you all, I only applied to 2 schools. I was only accepted at 1 school, and I graduated from the other school 4 years later. That's true.
I've never heard that one. That's interesting.
So there's always a way. If you want to do something, you can do it. Night school, take a class, whatever. There's ways to do it. All of you guys did early decision. Is that such a popular thing now? It wasn't like a big deal when I went with Fred Flintstone. But can you guys talk about early decision, why you decided to go early decision with certain places, early action, and so on?
I think Demetrius was probably highly encouraged to do his early decision by the football office. But chime in.
I heard my father went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. Although he went to Wharton and I didn't want to commit to any specific school, so I just applied to the College of Arts and Sciences. But the way that he spoke about the school on a more personal level, it really interested me. And I visited once with my family and I loved it so much that I went back and I stayed with a friend there to get the real experience. And I think that the moment that I really realized that I would be happy there, applying early decision and completely committing, forgetting about all the other schools, was when I was writing the supplement, and my college counselor told me that they don't want to see a supplement that I could copy and paste into any other school and just replace the name. So in doing a lot of research and actually learning about their courses and who speaks there and their professors, I really thought that I identified with the school enough to make it move.
Anybody else?
For me personally, I had a brother who's a senior there now, and he talked to me about this one school. It's called the Industrial Labor Relations School, and he talked to me about, like, he knows I love sports and sports management. He talked about how you can do all that and all this other kind of stuff. So I kind of realized that that's what I wanted to do, so that's why I tried to apply there, because I had heard such great things about it from my brother.
Thank you.
Yes.
Did all of you physically visit all of the schools that you applied?
So out of I actually did apply to 6, and 4 I just found out from so far. And I didn't visit 2 of them, and one of them, I actually had visited about 25 schools. And one of them that I've heard from, I got deferred from, and I think it would be really beneficial to see the schools beforehand so they know that you're interested, and obviously then you see more of it and get to know it a lot better.
I think it was very beneficial to go visit your schools. I didn't see all the schools that I was talking to or interested in going to, but one thing I personally did is I researched a lot about every single school and really found out exactly what I wanted to do. If I could build a path when I was at school, this is what I would do. And I think if you don't necessarily meet the ability to go to all the schools, that's the first place you should look to. Just try to figure out everything you can about the school before necessarily going, and then get that personal experience. Because I know when I made my decision with them in the summer, I was kind of sure, in fact, that I didn't see all the other schools I was talking to, but I figured it out. I put different scenarios together, and this is where I want to be, because I've done so much research. So it allowed me not to fear the fact that I didn't go see a different school when I made my decision. So.
Yes.
You know, this may be totally a silly question, but applying early decision early action, does that in any way take a little bit of stress out of the whole process? Or is it counteracted by more anxiety because, you're not sure?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's reassuring that you know what you're looking for, in the sense that you found a school that caters to everything that you've been searching for, and you know that there are other schools that will offer very similar things, so it's something to fall back on, but at the same time, it's hard not to completely just set your heart on that one school when the chances aren't always good. I know some kids who apply to early decision, they have this moral dilemma where, what if I apply to early decision to certain schools and get in, and what if I want to go to another school? And that was a struggle that some kids were having.
Yes.
Did any of y'all not know what you wanted to study and not know where you wanted to go and just started the process with the world open? And how did you narrow it down to where you wanted to apply?
Well, since I'm originally from Australia, both my parents didn't go through the U.S. schooling system, so it was kind of tough for me to navigate because my older sister does go to university in the U.S., but that was the first time kind of delving into the process, so it was a little difficult finding my way at first. But I think, sorry, I just lost my
It's Saturday, it's okay.
Right, sorry, okay. So, I went to STIB so many times, and Mr. Sabah. And he really helped me narrow down just a balanced out general list of schools. And I found that when I was doing my supplements, that was when I really kind of picked what I wanted to do. At first I was, I'm undecided, I have no idea, I don't know, liberal arts, I'm just going to get a general education. But I think the supplements really helped me figure out what I wanted to do. I ended up applying every school for the classics. So I think writing it down and kind of, like you said, looking on the websites and, that really helped me pick what.
I think sometimes you also have surprises. Going to Cornell is kind of funny because I remember when I handed my list to the superintendent, Cornell was not actually on that list, and he just questioned said, why not Cornell? I never thought about the possibility of going there. My whole plan was built on actually going to Penn. So I think there are surprises you really figure out, going through the process and really just enjoying the process as much as you can will help you figure out the schools. I think going in and thinking, I want to go to this school for this reason, really will add more stress to the whole process. And you should really encourage instead of to just open all doors. Whatever you like to do, could you do this, could you do that? It doesn't have to be, I want to be a business student, just look at all business schools. Maybe you like history a lot, so maybe you could just be a history major. So figure out all that stuff out. Just kind of have everything on the table.
Question over here.
How many schools did you actually go and physically visit, and when did you do it?
I visited about 5 out of the 13 schools I applied to, and I did it over the course of my junior year and senior year. I think it's difficult when you're a junior to look at the right schools. I know I went to California during spring break of junior year, and so I looked at a couple schools and I was like, didn't aren't really what you're looking for at all. But either way, when I did go to California, it helped me decide if that wasn't what I wanted. So, like these guys have said before, it's the school that you go to, it's really beneficial. So just go and just check it out.
I think if you plan around maybe a family vacation, for me, I planned around one of the camps that I was going to for football. That really just helped. I had to go for a camp, so I was check out the schools and parents. So if you do a family vacation, you're going out to wherever, this time, you check out a school. Just kind of fill it in. It doesn't really matter. I did most of the schools in the summer, just for the faculty camps. But if you can fit into your schedule, it doesn't matter. Really necessarily take out a lot, any block time to do it, you need to work your schedule. And it's kind of that way. It doesn't go family necessarily, but you go out there and do the work.
Yes.
What is the first step? Because I'm new at this. Do you first go to the school and then apply? Or do you look at a broad range of schools, make the appointment, or make the applications, and then go see them?
I mean, most kids probably visit the school before they actually apply, I would think, but it varies a great deal. Some kids never go visit schools. Some kids go to see a whole bunch. Every kid seems to be a little bit different. I don't know that there's an easy answer for that, but by the time, October and November roll around, we have a pretty good idea where the kids are going to be applying, and that's when they do the dirty work to get everything ready. So that's the sort of the timing, but we have plenty of time to get from the unknown, absolutely undefined, where most of our juniors are right now, which is just fine, by the way, to the point of doing, there are 7 or 8 applications, and the kids end up managing it just perfectly.
And summer is a good time.
I think, I know I get a lot of flack for this, but I don't see, I don't believe kids have to be at schools when students are there. And if kids go to visit schools in the summer when students are there, that's just as good in my opinion. Because over the years I've found that students, when they come to visit Blair, within 10 or 15 minutes of their being here, they have a visceral sense of whether this place makes sense for them. And, students are students. If I've learned another thing in this business, okay, I'm not going to lie to you. The kids at West Point, Navy, and Air Force are a little different. You got to go see that. Some of the kids at Rose-Hulman are different, and MIT and Caltech, that's different. But after that, kids are all a lot alike. You'd be surprised. And kids are kids pretty much everywhere, so they don't really change. Communities are a little different sometimes, and kids get a sense of that. But Joe and Jason and I have been to so many places, we can offer some perspectives about communities that might make sense and help kids, even if they can't get to visit. So we do that as far as we can. So any visit is a good visit, even if your son or daughter gets out of the car and says, I'm never going to this, it's awful. Slams the door. Hey, don't say anything to her or him for a little bit, and then let it sink in, and then that's a good visit, because knowing what they don't like is just as important as knowing what they do. So just hang in there with it. It'll all figure itself out. Sorry to interrupt. Yes?
As far as trying to figure out what you think you might want as a university, I heard you mention the word supplement. I know that I'm going to try a lot about it. So what does that mean? If you were able to figure out what you think you might want to study, what kind of things you're looking for?
In the application process, we have a common application. So that's basically everything that you've done up to this point goes into this application. You fill out an education section, activity section, all the awards that you've won. You have a common essay that we all have to write. A couple schools don't use a common app, but very selective few don't. And schools individually have supplements. So those are just a couple essays, probably 2 or 3 essays, maybe a couple short little questions that you fill out for that college. So the examples of the supplement questions would be why Brown, for example.
The supplements are designed so the schools that you apply to can see a different side of it. There's some really interesting questions beyond why do you want to go to college. Some of them are if you create a class, what would it be and why? They want to get to know why you want to go to that school and how they think they can have you in their community as a positive impact. But the sometimes they're really kind of, you have to be very introspective, you have to think about yourself and kind of evaluate why you're doing it. So the questions are actually really hard to answer or at the beginning to try to figure out what you want to write about. But once you can get that, the essays are usually pretty short, but it's kind of like an extra of why you want to be here specifically.
At this point, if you have questions of any of the kids or Rob or Joe, who's sitting over here, feel free to ask any of us, but let's keep the kids in the loop as well. Yes, sir.
Can you guys describe a moment in the course of time between, starting the process to this moment? It was like a transitional moment, like an epiphany moment, or like it really changed things for you somewhere in the process. Is that, can you think of one of those?
For me, it was actually seeing all of my friends who graduated last year or hear back from colleges, because it kind of made me like, it's actually going to be our turn very soon. And you want to be able to, you hear all these kids getting in or not getting in, and you think, if I work really hard, hopefully I can get into the school like this kid, or I don't want to be that kid that doesn't get in because I didn't do enough. And that's not the case usually. It's not really in your control, but it kind of hits you like, okay, we really want to get this done because we have an idea of what we want to do maybe.
Anybody else?
For me, it was pressing the submit button for my early decision and early action school, because that's when I actually could say it's out of my hands, and I was in a state of peace for a So that was nice, and because of that, I think applying to my regular decision schools was a lot easier. I decided to apply to Brown a day before the application was due.
Yes, I remember that.
So I ended up going home and I just kind of cranked it out and wrote it. And I thought, what do I have to lose? I'll just write these couple essays, I'll just get it done, and I'll see what happens. And that was, I think, the best. I don't think anything's going to trump that in the application process, because, I thought, I don't have a chance, why would I even submit it? And then I ended up getting referred. So I think, I don't know, it's such a confusing process that I think just go with your gut, and tell your kids to, if they like the school, just apply, what's the worst that can happen?
I think for my parents, the best part was even as a third child, when I got my first acceptance to school. I think it's good to, and the college counselors will make sure of it, to apply to a variety, even if you're only applying to a couple schools, maybe have a reach that you're really interested in and a target and safety.
Yes.
Are you thinking about what you want to do after undergraduate? Like, are you thinking about where you would like to work and maybe companies that recruit at the university or graduate school, kind of a long-term plan, or are you kind of looking just now?
Go ahead, Dave, tell about your long-term plan.
Sadie Hawkins.
But for me, the whole alumni aspect, the whole future, where am I going after, was a big deal to me, a big deal for all schools. That's always the question I always ask coaches. I never asked about, what defense do you run, all that stuff, or why play. It wasn't really, it didn't matter to me as much as, well, if I go to school, where am I going to be 10 years down the road? And I think that's a very important thing to look at. Very important to find out, are the alumni active? Are they constantly there? Are they bringing people? Do they have a bunch of clubs or activities that I can involve myself in? And so that, for me, is a really important part of the process. You don't want to just go to school because it's number 13 in the world and I can study science. You want to go to school because I can study science and be part of this group, and this alumni is going to come back and maybe I can get a job, and this is what will happen. And you kind of want to have a plan. I do believe that you shouldn't, like I said before, have a strict plan, a strict path, and only want to follow them. You really are not willing to go off of it a little bit, but it's very important to have that, to research and look for an aspect of it. You're not just going to school because it's the number 3 program in the district.
Don't worry if your son is not like that. He was making college lists when he was 6 years old in his basement. Most of us are not doing that, right? it tickles me when I hear your story.
Yes.
This question pertains to your SAT prep classes. I'm assuming you all did SAT prep. Can you recommend, and I think there are a couple options, which ones did you guys do, and did they help you raise your scores?
I did one that came to Blair, but it was a company outside called Pinnacle Prep, and it was a one-on-one tutor. And I decided to just do this separately, although Blair does offer different courses and different classes that we can take. But I thought it was really beneficial. I set a goal with my teacher, and we got pretty close, which was good, and that's what I needed. So I thought it was really good.
I took the Briggs Mood Swing SAT prep course that Blair offers, and he comes to Blair, and each section that he teaches, whether it's writing, reading, or math, it meets for an hour and a half on Sundays. And it was actually, in the beginning, it helped me get my score up a pretty significant margin, and then once you kind of got to that threshold, it was harder to get up. But both of my brothers actually, or at least one of my brothers took that course, and it helped him a lot. So as long as you're willing to do the work, it will help you out.
Were you able to do the work in conjunction with schoolwork and sport? I mean, was it super difficult, or was it you were managing?
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just would want to say that it's never easy at a boarding school for kids to set aside huge blocks of time to do test prep. It's just hard. And the only thing that we can do, I mean, we do offer on the Naviance program, there's, you know, the free test prep. Kids who are diligent can do that on their own, and that's awesome. We have Brig who comes and teaches classes, and that works for some of the kids, not all the kids, but it works for some of the kids. And we have some private people who do it. There's a whole host of things, and some kids can't do it, don't want to do it during the school year. They'd rather do it in summer. So, I mean, I think the conversation is one that needs to be had with your counselor, and trying to figure out what works best. And not every kid does it, and not every kid needs to or wants to. So it varies a great deal. Yes, sir.
So a question, maybe a general question, and maybe for Rob as well, SAT versus ACT. Like what's, I mean, I guess some of us obviously studied abroad, so a lot of this is all new for us as well. From an admissions perspective to colleges, it sounds like they treat it the same.
I mean, I can't speak for Rob. I'm going to guess they, you know, he'll probably say what I'm going to tell you is that they, whatever works best for you and whatever you present is what they'll be happy to look at. I don't know that one school is in. I don't know. I think Brigham Young is the only school that I know of that requires the ACT and doesn't accept the SAT. I'm not sure anybody else cares. And essentially, it's just a measure, you know, that they like to have. Joe would probably tell you, he's our director of testing. He could probably answer more specifically about one over the other and how many kids do well and how many kids don't. But Rob, what were you going to say?
I just want to add something very similar, that for our purposes and all the places I've worked, we look at them interchangeably. We have no preference, and honestly no preference for one versus the other. There are, we use in our office what's called a concordance table. The first time, and probably the only time in my life I've used the word concordance, is to refer to the translation table that is available both through the College Board and the ACT on their website to say, if you got this score on the SAT, this is the equivalent score on the ACT. And that's good information to have as, especially people like Joe who work more intimately with the test can tell you, there are going to be subtle differences in the types of the questions, the pacing of the test, that some students just may find more adaptable to how they would like to go through a standardized testing experience. And they may find, as we do, occasionally students do markedly better on one versus the other. So I think a good strategy nowadays is not to put all your resources into just prepping for one. That doesn't mean prep twice as much, but that means try the other one, at least to see what ballpark you're in. If you get a 1400 on the SAT and you get a 20 on the ACT, which is a very disparate set of scores. Keep working on the SAT because the ACT is not worth the investment to continue to bring up. But the other thing I find between the two, I'm also surprised every year how many students actually get the equivalent score. I mean, dead equivalent. And sometimes I wonder, okay, hopefully you didn't invest all this time in taking multiple tests multiple times to only find out you're about the same standardized tester regardless of what.
Our results would indicate the very same thing. I mean, there are kids who go one way or the other, but they're outliers, and statistically, I would say probably more than 90% of the kids score on one what they score on the other. So we don't really necessarily care one way. We offer them both here, so it's convenient for our students.
Yeah, having lived through this process or survived last year, my sense is that beyond the personal interview, the essay is critical in allowing you to get to know the individual. So my question is, what percentage of those essays truly have authentic voice, and what impact does that have on the outcome of your decision-making process?
I like your question, and I'm, the three working brain cells I have, one of which, by the way, has to remember my wife's cell phone number, so I've only got two. Authenticity.
Yeah.
That's something even on my best days, I can't speak specifically to how authentic or inauthentic an essay is. But
There are those essays that have that intangible, right? That you get to know that kid.
Yes, but where I tend to see, and I was telling some folks during the break, the memorable essays, the essays that I think are the most effective, tell me a story that is personal, relevant, and specific to that individual. And you try to look at them optimistically and say that this is the student's own work and this is a genuine reflection of their writing ability, and it's a genuine reflection of some personal activity or event. So where I tend to hope that they're all coming to me with some relevant authenticity, it's, in my experience, what I'm looking for is some evidence that this is connected to something that is meaningful to the person. It's a unique enough situation in an ideal environment where I'm seeing something and hearing something about this individual that is unlikely going to happen in the rest of the applicants. And the story I told over break is literally my favorite essay of all time, was about a young woman who applied to my institution to be a mechanical engineer, was valedictorian of her medium-sized public high school in upstate New York, and petitioned to get into the vocational welding class, and much to the dismay of her school board, who said, the bright kids don't take Votech welding. And that's a kind of a day-in-the-life story. Now, her twist was that she petitioned, she was successful, and the very first day of Votech welding, she burned herself. Just a little nick on the hand, which she says, is her constant reminder of anything worth trying for is worth doing your best at. And any opposition is worth overcoming if it's something you believe. And that authenticity didn't come necessarily from the quality of her writing. I don't remember if it was particularly well written by college standards, but I remember what she was telling me. Because it was unique, it was effective, and it was personal.
Yes, sir.
Question for Rob. You mentioned in your presentation that Bucknell, and I assume a lot of other institutions, are matching applicants into the segments of the university or school. So does Bucknell and do your peers and competitors ever publish how many applicants you're receiving per school within your institution? Because it seems to me that that's as relevant as 900 to 2,800. Right? How many engineering applicants are you getting relative to how many slots are there? How many liberal arts applications are you getting broken down?
We do. So the question was, do we disaggregate, do we separate out in our applicant pool for the public's information how many are in certain portions of our applicant pool, engineering and management, arts and sciences? And we do. We do at Bucknell. To give people at least a rough gauge that behind a 27, 29, 30% admission rate, which is about where we are every year, should somebody be aware? We think they should be if our College of Engineering is a touch more selective than the university as a whole, because then we think it gives people more realistic perspective. Now that doesn't necessarily say that somebody who applies to engineering at a 24% admission rate is a lot less likely to get in than if they had applied to humanities, which is probably a 32 or 33% admission rate. Because if you've ever met an engineer and you've ever met a creative writer, you know they're different types of people. And the person who's effective in one pool and a compelling candidate won't necessarily be affected. But at least then, for say an engineer, they know that the selectivity is a little higher, so then when they compare us versus peer institutions, they do have some sense that the program they've chosen to apply to is a little bit more selective. Some places do, some places may not publish it, but if the question is asked, I find most of my colleagues at other places have no interest in being opaque about the process. There's enough things that we can't articulate in the process that are subjective to begin with. But something like, do you admit students differently based on different academic programs? They should be able to answer that question. And then, is it statistically significant, the difference between those admission programs?
That's a good question. Yes, sir.
Is there a number of schools you suggest people should apply to? How many do you apply to?
Well, let's get the numbers off here.
13.
He's out.
I plan to apply to about 12, but I only did one application. I applied to 12.
That has grown over the years, I will tell you. It used to be, back in the day, when people had to do individual applications, that number was a lot lower. But with the, it's pretty easy to manage a higher number with the Common App today. So aside from the supplements the kids have to write, but they do a pretty good job. I don't know that there is any number. Every kid is different. Some kids can do it in 4 or 5. Some kids, need more schools. I would also tell you that we've had, kids who have applied to 13 schools and been denied at 12. And it hurts. We've also had kids apply to 14 schools and gotten into 14 schools. And that hurts. You might not think of it that way, but when April rolls around and they're trying to make decisions, and they're going back and revisiting, and they're just a mess. So that either one of those extremes is not necessarily a good thing. But we try to make sure that there's a balance. That's all we ask for. The numbers don't really matter to us. I think for me personally, the check is when I look a kid in the eye and say, are you okay going to your likely school? Because if you can't look me in the eye and tell me you're okay going there, we haven't done enough work. And once we get to that point, it's pretty easy. Because then, how the chips fall, we'll never really know, but at least we know that the kid has got places, he's going to be okay. Some kids can do it in 4, some kids can do it in 14. In the end, they're still only going to one place. But I don't know if that helps, but that's, yeah.
Actually, it's different from the start of my application. Somewhere it's actually something that's recommended in my college counseling office. So I think good to start in the summer, just it's not stressful. So definitely, I started, finished my Common App application for my senior year, and I started planning out my supplements for where I was planning on to. So that's important.
Oh, the Common Application. This year was an interesting year because they redid it all. And so there were a lot of issues with the Common App this year that never had been in place before, but I'm sure it'll all be smoothed out for next year. Usually August, I think. And you know, honestly, the actual completion of the Common App is not all that onerous. The essays and the writing piece take some time, but yeah, it's very doable before you get back. You know, you have that part, not necessarily the essay, but certainly the other parts are pretty manageable.
We love a draft of the essay, though.
Yeah.
I'd like a working draft on that first day of school.
I think it was really relieving to have the main Common App essay finished before I got back to Blair, and also to have at least gone through and drafted the Common App, because there's a lot of questions about when your parents graduated or where their hometown is, and some of it's, I mean, it's not complicated, but it's easier to have your parent there and say like, oh, 1961 or whatever it is, instead of sitting on the phone.
Anything else for anyone here before I let these kids go? You have a hand? Yes, sir.
Well, this is actually for the admissions professionals. The question is really one of whether you see any issues of comparability in these percent admitted numbers from schools to schools, in that there may be, some of them may have more sort of admission appropriate pools of kids applying, more realistic or more reaching kids in the pool, versus others that may have more sort of more truer mix of applicants.
Are you talking about self-selecting applicant pools? That's what I think the term is. That they use.
Well, I mean, it may be, is a 4 or 5% admissions rate for some schools somewhat skewed by the fact that they are such exciting, amazing schools to apply to, and a lot of kids are applying, even though many of them aren't really realistic candidates for those schools, whereas that might not be the case. I mean, is there any skewing, or do you see real comparability?
Good question. Good way to at least be acknowledging that the admission rate in most institutions, for good consumer information, put it in their profile, and some of us, to be honest, also brag on ourselves about it. But I think the heart of your question is, then, is there any usefulness to extrapolate, saying, oh, Bucknell, use ourselves as an example, 29% admission rate, does that make you a lot better than a place with a 34% admission rate, and does it make you a lot worse than a place with a 22% admission rate? And you pointed out something, absolutely, that some colleges work very hard to get an applicant, a homogeneous applicant pool that is very big, so they can appear a little bit more selective. And other places, and we've been more in this camp, say, we know the kind of student we're looking for. Let's not focus a lot of attention on getting a lot of applicants at the low end, just so our admission rate goes down. Because they're not really interested in us. We're not particularly likely to admit them. Why don't we focus on the kind of the middle of the pack, the students who likely are going to be good matches with Bucknell? Because you can have two schools, to reverse your question, with an identical admission rate. But you can have at least two significant characteristics be different. One, their academic profiles may be different. And unfortunately, usually they're only boiled down to grade point average or testing. But you can at least say, okay, this school and this school both admit 30% of their applicants, but they seem to be drawing a significantly different type of student. If one school recruited a lot of inadmissible students, they would get their admission rate down, but then that's throwing good money after bad results. The other is if if an institution has a particular unique mission or academic purpose, they are more likely to have what Mr. Stavel just referred to as a self-selecting applicant pool. That, for example, I mentioned Rose Holman during my talk, which is a very strong, small school of engineering and science. They offer humanities and social science, but really their bread and butter is engineering and science. And as he mentioned, when you're on their campus, you know whether or not you're a fit. You know what kind of people are there. They tend to have a higher rate of admission because people are much more likely at a place like that to have a very strong reaction to whether or not they're a fit. But their higher admission rate doesn't mean they're any less academically rigorous or any more poorly resourced than a school with a lower admission rate that tends to be more heterogeneous just in terms of its academic programs. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
That's a good question. You know what we need to do, though? We need to sort of stop for a minute. First of all, I want to thank the panelists for coming. I know